The Netherlands has multiple musical traditions. Contemporary Dutch popular music is heavily influenced by music styles that emerged in the 1950s, in the United Kingdom and United States. The style is sung in both Dutch and English. Some of the latter exponents, such as Golden Earring and Shocking Blue, have attained worldwide fame. More traditional Dutch music, however, is a genre known as levenslied, meaning song of, about life. These songs have catchy, simple rhythms and melodies, and are always built up on couplets and refrains. Themes are often sentimental and include love, death and loneliness. Traditional Dutch musical instruments such as the accordion and the barrel organ are essential to levenslied, though in recent years many levenslied artists also use synthesizers and guitars. Artists in this genre include Koos Alberts and the late André Hazes and Willy Alberti. Dutch techno, hardstyle, gabber, trance and other styles in electronic dance music conquered the world. Most of the best-known DJs in the EDM scene hail from the Netherlands, including Tiesto, Armin van Buuren, Ferry Corsten, Sander van Doorn, Fedde Le Grand, Hardwell, Showtek and Afrojack, all of whom consistently rank high in the DJ Mag Top 100 DJs and other rankings. The Amsterdam Dance Event is the world's leading electronic music conference and the biggest club festival for the many electronic subgenres on the planet. These artists also contribute significantly to the mainstream pop music played over the airwaves all around the world, as they frequently collaborate and produce for many notable artists. Also, hip-hop in the Dutch language is very popular in the Netherlands and Belgium. Classical and contemporary classical music. Jan Pieter van Sweelinck was a Dutch composer, organist, and pedagogue whose work straddled the end of the Renaissance and beginning of the Baroque eras. Sweelinck was a master improviser, and acquired the informal title of the Orpheus of Amsterdam. Over 70 keyboard works of his have survived, and many of them may be similar to the improvisations that residents of Amsterdam around 1600 were likely to have heard. Even his vocal music, which is more conservative than his keyboard writing, shows a striking rhythmic complexity and an unusual richness of contrapuntal devices. His influence was international. Some of his music appears in the Fitzwilliam Virginal Book, which otherwise mainly contains the work of English composers. Sweelinck wrote variations on John Dowland's internationally famous Lacrimae me Pavani, and John Bull, the English keyboard composer, wrote a set of variations on a theme of Sweelinck, indicating the close connection between the different schools of composition across the North Sea. Jacob van Eyck was a blind recorder and organ virtuoso, who composed a unique collection of flute music. Unico Wilhelm van Wassenaar was an accomplished Baroque composer, whose work Concerti Armonici erroneously was attributed to Giovanni Battista Pergolesi. Igor Stravinsky used Unico's music for Pulcinella. Alphonse Diepenbrock. He created a musical idiom which, in a highly personal manner, combines 16th-century polyphony with Wagnerian chromaticism, to which in later years was added the impressionistic refinement that he encountered in Debussy's music. Willem Pijper is generally considered one of the most important figures in modern Dutch music. Between 1918 and 1922 he grew into one of the more advanced composers in Europe. In each successive work he went a step further, and from 1919, Pijper's music can be described as atonal. However, Pijper remained a composer of strong emotional character, to which his Third Symphony bears witness. In Pijper's later works the harmonic expression seems at times to approach monotonality. As a teacher, Pijper had a great influence on modern Dutch music, teaching many prominent Dutch composers of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. He was senior master of instrumentation in the Amsterdam Conservatoire, and from 1930 until his death in 1947 he was head of the Rotterdam Conservatoire. Ton de Leeuw is known for his experiments with microtonality. He wrote one opera, Antigone, Lex van Delden was an important composer. Louis Andriessen is a composer whose early works show experimentation with various contemporary trends. Post-war, serialism, pastiche, and tape. Andriessen's mature music combines the influences of Stravinsky and American minimalism. His harmonic writing eschews the consonant modality of much minimalism, preferring post-war European dissonance, often crystallized into large blocks of sound. Large-scale pieces such as De Start, Republic for example, are influenced by the energy of the big band music of Count Basie and Stan Kenton and the repetitive procedures of Steve Reich, both combined with bright, clashing dissonances. Andriessen's music is thus anti-Germanic and anti-Romantic, and marks a departure from post-war European serialism and its offshoots. He has also played a role in providing alternatives to traditional performance practice techniques, often specifying forceful, rhythmic articulations, and amplified, non-vibrato, singing. Other notable works include Workers' Union, a melodically indeterminate piece for any loud-sounding group of instruments, Mausoleum for two baritones and large ensemble, the TIJD, Time, for female singers and ensemble, the Snelheid, Velocity, for three amplified ensembles, the Materie, Matter, a large four-part work for voices and ensemble, collaborations with filmmaker and librettist Peter Greenaway on the film M is for Man. Music, Mozart and the operas Rosa, a horse drama and writing to Vermeer, and the recent La Passione for female voice and ensemble. Significant composers after Andriessen include Klaas de Vries, Jacob ter Veldhuis, a.k.a. Jacobi TV, Guus Janssen and Cornelis de Bont. Dutch folk music is characterized by simple, straightforward bass motives heavily supplemented with fast, often happy, melody. Uncommon among other European folk, in Dutch music the bass line, not the melody, is the musical line that is danced to. This means that though the music itself may sound fast, the dances are usually quite moderate to slow in tempo. The dances themselves are mainly group dances rather than individual or dual dances. Clogs are often worn during dances. However, Dutch clog dancing is very different from its more modern counterpart. It is virtually impossible to perform highly active dances with Dutch clogs, and hence the clogs function as additional percussion, by stamping rhythmically. In the early 19th century, rural Dutch folk began moving to cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam, bringing with them folk traditions. Many of their songs and dances, however, began to dwindle in popularity. In the early part of the 20th century, however, a number of urban intellectuals traveled to the countrysides to record with local musicians, a process paralleled in other European countries, such as Spain. In the 1970s, the Netherlands underwent a roots revival, led by artists like Gerard van Massakers, Jos Koning, Dom Elvolk and Arcaviel Popers BV, Fungus and Wolverlei. Many of the folk songs performed by these musicians was collected by Kobe Schreier and Nate Dornbosch, the latter of whom broadcast him on his radio program Onder de Grain Lind. It was in about 1974 that the Dutch folk revival peaked, a year marked by the first recording of Fungus and the birth of Wagram from the band Pitchwheel. The mainstream popularity of the Dutch roots revival was short-lived, but it continued in Friesland, where a handful of groups, starting with Irolt in the mid-1970s, sang in the West Frisian language. Frisian folk music has survived, thus aided in part by the RE Pop Festival in Nijlen, an annual festival in Jura. At Jura's festival, established in 1955, participants dress in 19th-century style clothes and perform traditional music and dance like the Scotsbloek ensembles. Modern revivalists include the Groningen band Torf, Folkkorn, Pakel and Tweewilen en Bar, Lirio, Dubious, Muse, Matsko, Ween en Henk. Moluccan Dutch musicians like Tala Mena Siwa and the Moluccan Moods Orchestra have had some success with pop-based Moluccan music, while Kaseko, a style from the former Dutch colony of Suriname, has also seen mainstream popularity, primarily due to musicians like William Souvenir and Carlo Jones. In the first decade of the 21st century there was an upsurge of neo-folk by bands such as HERR and Omnia Jazz. The North Sea Jazz Festival attracts artists from international acclaim. Misha Mengelberg is a jazz pianist and composer. He was the pianist on Eric Dolphy's last album, Last Date. Also featuring on that record was the drummer Han Benink, and together with Pete Noordijk they formed a quartet which had a number of different bassists. They played at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1966. In 1967 he co-founded the Instant Composers Pool, an organization which promoted avant-garde Dutch jazz performances and recordings. With Han Benink and Willem Breuker, Mengelberg has played with a large variety of musicians. He has often performed in a duo with compatriot Benink, and with other musicians including Derek Bailey, Peter Brotsman, Evan Parker, Anthony Braxton. Han Benink is a jazz drummer, percussionist and multi-instrumentalist. Through the 1960s he drummed with a number of American musicians visiting the Netherlands, including Dexter Gordon, Sonny Rollins and Eric Dolphy. He subsequently became a central figure in the emerging European free improvisation scene. From the late 1960s he played in a trio with saxophonist Peter Brotsman and Belgian pianist Fred Van Hove, which became a duo after Van Hove's departure in 1976. Through much of the 1990s he played in Cluzone 3, a trio with saxophonist and clarinetist Michael Moore and cellist Ernst Rage Sager. He has often played duos with Mengelberg and collaborated with him alongside other musicians, as well as playing with these long-standing groups. Benink has performed and recorded solo, and played with many free improvisation and free jazz luminaries including Derek Bailey, Connie Bauer, Don Cherry and Alexander von Schlippenbach, as well as more conventional jazz musicians. Willem Breuker was a jazz band leader, composer, arranger, saxophonist, and bass clarinetist. Since 1974 he led the 10-piece Willem Breuker Collectief, which performed jazz in a theatrical and often unconventional manner, drawing elements from theatre and vaudeville. Pop music in Dutch language. Many Dutch artists have become popular by singing songs in their own language. It started with Peter Koelewijn in the late 1950s, the first to sing rock and roll in Dutch. In the 1960s it was mainly Boudewijn de Groot, to this day extremely popular. In the 1970s there were many performers, of which Rob de Nij stood out. The 1980s were for André Hazes and Les Koozalbits. The 1990s were dominated by Marco Bassato. Other well-known names throughout the years were Jan Smit, Frans Bauer, Gerard Joling, Gordon, Guus Meeuwish and René Froger. Another notable Dutch band is Tambourine. In addition, there is a large group of bands that compose and perform pop and rock songs in the Dutch language. That started in the 1970s with Paul Edouard Bots and Norma All, which sang in dialect. Late 70s and early 80s there was a big boom of bands that used the Dutch language in their songs. Well-known representatives from that period: Domar, Het Gode Dol, Frank Boer Gengroep and Toentje Lager, and during the late 80s to DIJK, The Scene and Trokkenekeks. In the 90s there was a second boom: ACDA en de Monique Bloft van Dik Houten IOS.